challenge your assumptions and your stories, which requires first, of course, being able to look at them and identify them. And for introverts, that story is often, I'm not a good networker, I'm not good at sales. Challenge all of those things.
Top leaders, meaningful conversation, actionable advice, bulldoze complacency, ignite inspiration, create impact. Produced by the Southwestern family of companies. This is the Action Catalyst.
Are you interested in advertising with the Action Catalyst? Our listeners could be hearing about your brand right here, right now. For details, shoot us an email at info@theactioncatalyst.com.
My guest today is Beth Buelow. She has a book called The Introvert Entrepreneur. She's really involved in this whole area of study around introverts and specifically with entrepreneurs. And she writes for Psychology Today. She's been featured in Inc. and Fast Company and Forbes, and she's just awesome. And she's the sweetest lady. So Beth, thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So are you an introvert? That's my first question.
I am, absolutely. I feel like I fall pretty squarely on the introvert scale. Although over the years, as I've taken the assessment, I inch a little bit more towards the middle, which I see as a very healthy thing. And I'd like to share a little bit more about that because I think a lot of introvert entrepreneurs find that as they grow their businesses, they do start to inch a little towards the middle.
Well, and what really even is an introvert to start? I think there's probably some, misconceptions that people have about introverts. So can you kind of clearly define the term for us?
Yeah. Introversion and extroversion has to do with where we gain and drain energy. And I must say, I'm doing a rather simplistic definition of it just for ease of explanation and to get to kind of the root of it. So introverts gain energy through solitude and drain energy during social interaction. And while I don't like to think of them as opposites, again, for purposes of simplicity, if you think of extroverts as the opposite, they gain energy through social interaction and drain energy when left alone to their own devices for too long. And so we all fall on a spectrum. And all of us have introvert and extrovert energy in us. Like I was saying, when you asked me that question, I'm definitely an introvert, but I have cultivated and been able to learn to tap into the extrovert energy that I have within me that allows me to be an entrepreneur, to do my business, to talk to people like you. It's there. I think it's a matter of forming a healthy relationship with it, recognizing it and learning how to pull it out in the context of being an introvert as opposed to trying to be a fake extrovert.
What exactly is the introvert entrepreneur? And why did you start studying this and write this whole book about it?
Well, what I love about the introvert entrepreneur is it describes me and it describes who I serve. And it's kind of an undertapped, or I should say underrepresented group of people who are making big strides in business, but the literature, the work that's out there is not always something that resonates with us, because there does tend to be a message of bigger, faster, more. And you've got to be out networking constantly. It's all about sales. You have to be outgoing and all of that in order to succeed. And introverts who are drawn to entrepreneurship feel an initial excitement, and they have that initial energy around creating their business, taking their message out into the world, working with clients and customers and all of that. So there's an initial rush, if you will, of energy that happens. Then as they start to kind of, the honeymoon's over and you start to kind of dig into everyday life and getting into ways that you can make your business more sustainable, it's sometimes challenging to find information, to find affirmation that the way that you are in the world as an introvert is, number one, okay. It's perfectly normal. And number two, that it's possible to balance your energy, your tendencies, your preferences with the need to be able to go out and sell and network and market and do all of those extroverted activities that are required. So this book and my mission is to fill that gap, to reach out to the introverts who feel that entrepreneurial call and say, number one, you can do this, and you can do this in such a way that you don't burn out because you're trying to meet the extrovert expectation that is so prevalent in all of the information out there. Here are some ways to honor who you are without selling your soul, to use that kind of cliche.
Right. What do you think are some of the misconceptions that people have about introverts in general?
It goes to how they're perceived in social situations. And that's one reason why I like to separate out the definition from and say it's about energy. It's not about personality. People will think that introvert equals shy. When I give presentations and I ask people what word comes to mind when you hear the word introvert, it is always shy, even from people who know better. They say, our minds typically default to the stereotype, to the single story that we have about introverts, that they're shy. And introverts sometimes internalize that. From a young age, when a child is, starting to walk and talk, parents are looking for social skills. They're looking for evidence that that child is going to be, socially well adjusted. And that's talking, that's reaching out to other kids, wanting to play with them and wanting to be social. And if a child is not, if they're already showing those introvert tendencies of needing a lot of downtime, alone time, if a parent isn't tuned into that, they can already start putting that label of, well, little Beth, she's just shy, it's okay. Mm-hmm. And then you grow up with that label and you don't ever really question it. And so you think that when you go to a party or a networking event or any other big social outing and you're uncomfortable or you find it really exhausting, that it's because you're shy, as opposed to, well, perhaps it's about your energy and about being an introvert.
That's interesting.
People will say, well, introverts don't, I'm a people person. I'm not an introvert. Well, an introvert can be a people person. It's just that we need to have a certain ratio of alone time to people time that allows us to reach out to people. So for me, it might be I need 2 hours of downtime for every 1 hour I'm out and socializing and interacting with people. Mm-hmm. And that can include, and what's important for the entrepreneur to understand is that includes clients and customers. It includes the time you spend online. I remember the day I realized that just because I'm sitting alone in my office and I'm on the computer, maybe I'm blogging or I'm on social media or reading articles and commenting, it's still noisy. There could not be a peep coming out of my computer. But you realize how noisy it is when you shut the lid on your laptop, for instance, and you walk away. And it's like, wow, that's like I just hit the mute button. So it's recognizing all of those different places that you are interacting with people and understanding for yourself what's the balance that you need so that you have the energy to do those things when it's called for. It's stimulation. It's just a different form of stimulation than when you're talking with people. I mean, email and, you think of how easily you can get overwhelmed, or if you have too many tabs open on your browser, that's another way that we can create overstimulation for ourselves, that if you start to become aware of it and how much it's draining your energy, then you can start to manage it a little better.
Yeah. So do you think introverts, can they be charismatic? Like, can you go so far as to say you could be charismatic and still be an introvert?
Absolutely. I think that it's a different kind of charisma. As I mentioned before, it's not about being a fake extrovert. When I get up on stage, I don't want to try to be charismatic a la Tony Robbins or any of these other, high energy speakers. So charisma doesn't necessarily have to do, in my opinion, with being, really high energy and really extroverted. It has to do with an inner power, an inner confidence and trust, and being able to sincerely connect with other people. Just like they say, the best conversationalists are those who are the best listeners, not necessarily the best talkers. I think those with charisma it's not necessarily somebody who's like larger than life. It's somebody who emanates a very powerful, positive presence that helps other people feel connected to them and feel good about themselves. And I think, introverts absolutely have that power at their disposal.
What are the challenges there for an introvert salesperson or entrepreneur?
First, it has to do with recognizing that you can approach those processes on your own terms, that you have inherent strengths, that it's not about having the gift of gab. It's not about being able to, talk up a blue streak or any of that. I remember do you ever watch the show The Prophet? There was an episode when he was, of course, visiting a company and meeting the various staff, and he met the person who was the salesman. And he said, so what makes you good at sales? Or, what are your strengths? And he says, well, I'm a really good talker. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, that's going to end up in trouble later on. So introverts can have this story that it's all about talking. And what Marcus proved a little bit later in that same episode was that it wasn't the salesman's ability to talk that was an asset. I don't know. I think he did eventually find an asset in that person, but he basically kind of took the reins and said, here, let me demonstrate what really needs to happen here. And he asked questions and he listened. And it's something that I think we know intuitive, like, of course, how do I like to be sold to? I like for somebody to listen to me, to ask questions, to find out what I really need, and to be honest with me if they don't have it. And if introverts can get through this idea that it's kind of the cheesy car salesman and, what's it going to take to get you into my practice today, that it's really about listening to somebody and asking good questions and being a guide and a witness for solving their problem. A lot of it is mindset, and then realizing that that you have some inherent strengths as an introvert in that we often are really good listeners. We often do have that strong feeling of curiosity about the world, about other people, about their needs. And we like to put the spotlight on others. If you can bring those ideas into your sales process, then you're really taking something that might have seemed like a challenge and turning it into a strength. And to release this story or this idea that I have to be able to answer all of their questions so much as it's about I have to ask the right questions and trust that those answers are going to come out. So it can be, it's such a mental game, the inner game of sales is, I think introverts can, if they understand that those assets are there for them, they can cultivate the other skills that they need to be successful.
So you actually just wrote an article that was connected to some research that came out about introverts, extroverts, and then ambiverts. Tell us what ambivert means, and then tell us about the study.
Well, remember in the beginning, I talked about introverts and extroverts all being on a spectrum. And most people lean one way or the other. But there is a group of people who fall squarely in the middle, and they're called ambiverts. So think of ambidextrous. You're comfortable, writing with either hand.
Okay.
Ambiverts are comfortable gaining energy through social interaction or solitude. And I often think of it as a Friday night test. So think of Monday morning. So it's Monday, and you're already looking forward to Friday. And you say, Friday, 5:00. I can't wait to walk into my house and do what? So an introvert, most likely their default's going to be, I can't wait to decompress. I can't wait to not have to answer email or not have to talk to anybody. Yeah, I have to go to something on Sunday, but that's okay. I have the next few days to rest and gear up for that. An extrovert would be like, I can't wait for Friday. I get to put on my party clothes and go out to hear the band with my friends, or I'm having a dinner party on Saturday night. The ambivert doesn't necessarily have that strong default. On Monday, they're going to be like, well, I just kind of want to see how things go. I don't have a default setting, where I, as an introvert, I don't think you would ever find me on a Monday saying, I can't wait until go to that party on Friday night. No offense against the people who are giving the party, but it's just not what would come naturally. So ambiverts fall in that middle. And there's a researcher named Adam Grant of the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. And he looked at, he did a personality survey to more than 300 salespeople. And then he tracked their sales records for 3 months. And interestingly enough, he started with the premise that it would not be the extroverts who outperformed the introverts. He figured that introverts would probably do better. And he was proven right. But what he also found was that people who fell in the middle outproduced them both. So those ambiverts did better than the introverts, and the introverts did do better than the extroverts. Actually, let's see, ambiverts earned 24% more sales than introverts did, and 32% more than extroverts. And what he posited was that the ambiverts can naturally engage in this really flexible dance between, speaking and having enthusiasm and talking with the prospect, and then being quiet and listening and asking questions and just creating a great spaciousness around the conversation. Those were the people that were the most successful. And so they were persuasive, they were influential, but they weren't pressuring. Again, a very spacious kind of environment for that conversation. So I think introverts can take heart in that. Number one, that success in sales doesn't just belong to the extroverts. and that you can cultivate some of those ambivert skills. And for introverts, that means being confident and I hesitate to use the word bold because it implies that the opposite is timid. I don't think that we're timid in sales conversations, but we can kind of hold back questions or hold back thoughts because we want to process them or we want to save them. And we think, oh, I can just follow up later. And so the being bold would be asking them right there in that moment, extrovert yourself as a verb during that time in order to strike that balance that the ambiverts have found.
I think that's fascinating. We're running out of time, Beth. Where do you want people to go to learn more about you and check out The Introvert Entrepreneur?
Yeah, my website is home to my blog, podcast, and books. So that's theintrovertentrepreneur.com. And from there, you'll find my presence on all sorts of social media. And of course, you'll find links to The Introvert Entrepreneur, the book.
And so if somebody is out there, just the last little thing, who's listening and maybe they've always written off the idea of having their own business, or they've always written off the idea of being in sales, what advice would you give to that person?
To challenge your assumptions and your stories, which requires first, of course, being able to look at them and identify them. And for introverts, that story is often, I'm not a good networker, I'm not good at sales, I don't have the energy to sustain a business. Challenge all of those things and, find resources like my book, like there are several other great authors who've written about introversion, then, of course, entrepreneurship. But, seek out resources, seek out support, and learn how to, embrace your introversion so that you can work with it instead of against it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for encouraging us and inspiring us and helping us to challenge some of those beliefs.
I appreciate it.
If you enjoy this podcast, please make sure to subscribe. And to stay updated on everything that the Action Catalyst is up to, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Action Catalyst Podcast and on Twitter at Catalyst_Action. And as always, thanks for listening.